guys? Today it is Aniki here with your chapter 234 of My Hero Academia breakdown. Got the Wisconsin shirt on deck. Here you can read that for yourself. Anyways, let's get right into it. This chapter was kind of fun. I'm going to try not to talk too much about certain things within the context of this chapter due to the fact that it's all stuff that I kind of want to talk about in my Shigaraki video when I start doing villain analysis. So this one may or may not end up being, it'll either end up being long because I end up talking about all that stuff anyway, or it'll being a little shorter because I specifically avoid discussing certain aspects of the story that I want to save for later videos or discussions. But one of the things that I do think is like a nice little touch, another like a little splash, stroke of realism added to the story, is that you open up with the children's book of Let's Not Judge People by Their Quirks, which is, very necessary and kind of expected. We live in a society where we constantly have people, like the story of the caterpillar and the butterfly and all these other, like the ugly duckling, just various stories throughout human history. We've incorporated the idea of not judging primarily just based off of surface. You don't know what the person's full potential is, X, Y, and Z. And so the fact that down to the children's level, we have it set that you're not supposed to judge people based on their quirks just makes sense. It's a necessary step for the function of society. Plus, they start people in quirk counseling at like 5, 6 years old. This is a society that's willing to indoctrinate you into, making sure, at least that's how the Meta Liberation Army will phrase it. Let me be careful here. They will convince you to, like, everybody has a quirk, stay in your box, it's okay, don't judge everybody for their box. This is also why when people talk about world building within the context of My Hero Academia, though, I always say I don't care if we go to another hero society. To me, that's worthless. If we go to another place with the same setup as Japan, we have approved heroes, we have this, we have a voting system, blah, 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 blah. We're just going to Japan with different people. And that's whatever. That's not the kind of world building that fascinates me. Now, if we go to a hyper-fascist country where the only people allowed to use their quirks are like the police officers, and essentially if you get caught using your quirk, you get executed, I'm for that. If we go to a country that doesn't have heroes, but instead is just like a lawless, free-for-all bonanza, people just nutting their quirks everywhere, I want to see that. But I don't need Japan Part 2, but with American accents or in American cities. That's my personal take, but to me there's not a lot of narrative value that you can get out of that outside of maybe introducing another faction or just a villain group that happens to have been stationed overseas initially, and then like that'll just be kind of the, oh, it was an excuse to go to another country, and then people will go, oh yeah, it's really nice to see that everything is the same there. And it's like, well, kind of told you that in the first chapter. So anyway, that's just my little spiel on that. But Redestro comments on the fact that this book published by Shueisha, he was raised with the same message, but like the quirks do to a certain degree reflect who you are as a person. And that's something that I actually mentioned I think 2 videos ago, maybe 1 review ago, I'm not sure exactly how it times out, but essentially people's quirks do end up having a certain level of indicativeness of to who they are as people, where you have people like Shoto, for example. He's actually a really good example of this, even though part of that is like trauma based. You think about it, he has a very cold demeanor, like but he's also actually like secretly got a massive temper. He's a very angry individual, actually. Even when you go to the Remedial Course arc, he straight up talks about being a hero in part despite his dad, which is kind of far back, but not exactly that far back. That's still within about a month or 2 of where we are in the story currently. So I think that's just kind of important that you have these like half cold, like he comes off as really cold, but he's also got a hot temper. He's also really like got a like sharp tongue, like Bakugo's explosiveness, Ida's, being able to rush ahead, straightforwardness, all these very like consistent things throughout the story. Uraraka's always trying to be uplifting and cheerful. Her quirk literally allows her to lift anything that is within a certain weight range, obviously, if she can turn its gravity off without going sick. So even Momo's quirk creation, she consistently has to adapt to situations that are far beyond necessarily what her base physical capabilities are, but that doesn't matter if she can circumvent those circumstances by creating the right objects for the situation. So she's constantly forced to adapt and think on the fly, and she has a quirk that reflects that nature. So this is just something that you could argue that he's writing the story so that their personalities convey and line up with their quirks, but regardless, it's how the society has been structured. And we've seen it multiple times throughout like these people now that like I said with Stain, you know, like his blood curdle, it was an ability that one would be like an ostracized, but two, it like kept him stuck mentally. So he was a person stuck in the past of heroes. When he took your blood and drank it, you became stuck, same as he is psychologically. So that's just something that has been showcased already throughout the story. Here, Horikoshi is just directly telling you, yes, this is partially something that you should have observed by now. So if you haven't, I'm sorry, but at least now you know. He goes on to talk about the intricacies of Shigaraki's quirk and how he's ultimately a decay quirk. He doesn't have anything special. He calls out like his lack of ideation, and that's something that has been called out consistently by various villains, that he doesn't have necessarily a plan or vision, but rather he is a person that has a lot of feelings and the ability, like clout and capital and access to make moves, but he doesn't have necessarily a hard-lined, definitive direction. After he came away from his conversation with Izuku, his decision was that All Might had to die, and that was like the start of his conviction. But we haven't seen those goals completely manifest, even with his manifesto to Ujiko, that he would show them heaven and hell and destroy everything that he just didn't like, not with his allies' interest withholding. And so that's something that, like, again, ties into it. Like, the man who will destroy everything has hands that when he touches you just destroy you. This makes sense. He can hold nothing in his hands properly, no matter what he cherishes. A truly sad and cursed existence. So then we get into the interesting stuff where he goes, that was Hana's hand. And so what we have now is that one of the things that I talked about is that I think that back when Sleepy dropped, is that I believe that Shigaraki is a very repressed character, and I believe that his hands are directly tied to his memories, and this chapter is kind of confirming that. One of the things, like, we got to talk about how messed up this is. Like, AFO was definitely going out of his way to mess up Tomura. There's just no way to get around it at this point. Like, Ujiko shows up with, even like, all hypotheticals aside, let's just say the story went exactly as it's been presented. Shigaraki definitely did accidentally kill his family, and AFO was like, oh, word? Now I ain't got to do it, but I can use this. Let's just say that's how it went down. Taking the extra step to have Ujiko preserve these hands, which probably aren't even actually his family's hands, because why would just the hands be left? That's a big question that's been circulating through the community. I'm also just going to go ahead and let that be known on the record. Yes, that is a completely fair and valid question to have. Why were those hands just... No. There's reasons to be concerned. There's reasons to doubt AFO. Gets a little more complicated with Shigaraki himself, but he just kind of pulls up and goes, this pair of hands is your mom's, this is your dad's, this is your brother's, this is your grandfather's. Like, not your brother's, because we haven't seen a brother, but you get the point. Like, he just starts listing off family members, like, hey, these are the hands, and I'm specifically going to have you keep these hands on you so that you don't forget these feelings. Keep them close to you, make sure they never fade. The irony to that is that they did end up fading. Those memories did end up locked away. Shigaraki, instead of processing the guilt and grieving constantly, he decided instead to store that grief, to store that within the hands themselves, which is why as you see Hana's hand get destroyed, he's like, that was Hana's hand, and then he starts to get more flashbacks. You know, he's like looking back in time finally, because that hand, there's this thing called being associative, and what can happen is you can attach certain memories or ideas specifically to certain objects. It's really just a form of PTSD to a certain degree, where like, people love to be like, oh, haha, triggered, but like, no, that's an actual, like, psychological term. And some people, like, let's just say for whatever reason, every day, actually, here's an example from one of my childhoods. My mom, oh, this is gonna get heavy. Let's just say my mom, like, got really upset one day, and this was after, like, a fight she had with my stepdad where she did stab him, and then she was ready to, like, off herself, and because of that, we had ended up throwing away every knife in the house except for one knife with a blue handle. And the reason we kept that one is because that was the one that she almost stabbed herself with. It's really weird, but that's just what happened. Like, that, so, like, we got rid of as many knives in the house as possible and literally had one knife so that we could still do cooking stuff. But it was also the knife that was the symbol of the most messed up situation. Eventually, yeah, it broke and we got rid of it and had to replace it, but that doesn't change the fact that people can mentally lock onto objects and then put that object above all others and have memories and feelings attached to those objects that are really heavy. Uh, so as these hands are getting destroyed, though, the association is no longer there. He doesn't have that anchor anymore. That barrier, like those hands are the barrier between those memories and himself. And so having that, like finally losing that, now he has to actually deal with it and psychologically hold himself accountable essentially to those memories that he has. And so as we get more hands breaking, you find out that it seems like whatever Shig's dream was as a child, his dad wasn't on board with it, and Hana says to him, you should do like I do. I tell dad I want to be a bride someday." Some like I've seen like Caleb Cook on Twitter said that he felt like she was kind of like backhanded, like telling him that she's got a dream that makes their dad happy. I think she was telling him learn how to tell dad, what he wants to hear, because this is um, when you have younger siblings and you get in trouble, or you have situations where you as a kid, or even like functionally as adults, I don't agree with the idea of completely shooting down your child's dream. uh, you tell them, sometimes you just have to go through the motions and say what your parent wants to hear. Sometimes you need to know how to play the game. You have to play the game to win the game, and you can't win the game if you don't follow the rules. And that's just kind of not only how, like, parent child dynamics work, but life in general. You have to kind of be ready to, sometimes you got to do or say things, whether it's at the job or with your family members, that you wouldn't necessarily want to do, but it's optimal for keeping your convenience and happiness and just a nice state of being where you don't have to deal with as much drama. So we cut back, and Shigaraki's getting more and more memories. And as Redestro goes to try to crush his hand, or what's left of the half of hand that he has, his fingers grab onto it, and we get to see the decay start coming out. Now, this is something that I'm having personal fun with. I actually like the idea that Shigaraki's. I don't. This isn't Hunter x Hunter or Hunter x Hunter. I say the X sometimes because it helps some people realize exactly what I'm talking about. But this isn't Hunter x Hunter where you set up these conditions and you're like, oh, now that we've got all these like extraneous outliers, we get an especially buff ability. One for All only has the condition that you be strong enough to have it in your body, and GG, you get to body people. So why on earth where would the main villain story or his ability be that hamstrung, that hyper conditional, unless it was being saved for something else? Now, I'd already said I think that he's been holding back, and now that he's psychologically unstable, that's the only reason he didn't disintegrate Redestro just on jump right there. Because one, he had never used it with just two fingers before, so he wasn't prepared for it to come out. Two, he is not all here. As he's been thrown through the ground, as he's been, smacked around, taking damage, hands are falling off of his costume. We find out that skin condition, like he doesn't scratch just cause it's an actual skin condition, most likely a byproduct of his quirk, where like the same way that the Todorokis overheat, his skin breaks down and it's more fragile. You see him, he's just freaking out, like his head. He says my head's splitting apart. Chances are the blood you see on his face in that panel though is caused by his open wound that he has just sitting on his hand. He's literally just holding his hand to his head, two fingers, part of his palm, not living his best life. But in the process of all this, Redestro finally starts to realize that Shigaraki isn't what he once was. He comments on the fact that he's strong enough now that he feels like if Shigaraki had been this strong, he should have taken out at least a hero or two during the Kamino incident. Most of the heroes at the Kamino incident were like top 10 pro heroes, so I do think we're supposed to get a gauge out of this that Shigaraki has definitely made some serious improvements. Edgeshot is confirmed to move and fold his body at the speed of sound plus, so the idea that Redestro looks at Shigaraki's movements and capabilities as similar to or capable of tangling with some of these people is a massive sign for Shigaraki's growth throughout his training with Gigantomachia, and that's even commented on. Now, the thing that I don't necessarily agree with is Awakening. Obviously Horikoshi is like making the point to highlight this, but I want to point out that awakening or improving your quirk and getting new functions was hinted at during joint training arc. Just in case anybody tries to say that awakening is an ass pull, it is definitely not. Vanta Black was originally showcased and explained to be able to dive into anything that's black, and eventually through training and honing his quirk and getting better at it, he also gained the ability to make black things that were capable of movement also move. Um, that's just another way in which awakening, you could argue, occurred for a character. So you don't even necessarily need the biggest stressor. You need the best training, the best access. To me, this seems like what happens is that people discover their quirk as a child, and that's basically them crawling. And then people get really good with their quirk, or they practice their quirk, and they move up, and eventually they gain. It's like they're walking. And I think a lot of people, because of the fact that they don't become pro heroes or they don't have like the proper training, don't ever get beyond the walking phase of utilizing their quirk, because there's no practical reason for them to do it. But when you think back to what they said, tearing apart your quirk is like building up muscles. Certain things that you couldn't do when you were younger will become easier the more trained you are in certain aspects, whether it's your physicality. For example, you might not be able to kick above your head, but I guarantee if you take some gymnastics and then you go back to taekwondo, your legs are going to be more flexible. You might kick a little higher. Your body took a training in another department, and you ended up finding a way to utilize your leg better. And in the same way, the example that Redestro gives, to me, even hints at that, because when you think about what Getten's power is, it is to control ice. Now, why on earth do we equate like manipulation of ice to only being able to influence its movement, its shape, its form, or like creating more of it or spamming it in the same way that Shoto does? It's because that's the only way we've seen the power applied. That's how most people utilize it. Endeavor could just shoot out giant torrents of flames. Instead, he has chosen to master a precise style where he compresses them, increases their heat, and overall, now we can see him cut down buildings and all kinds of other things with these flames. But obviously, if he was like, oh, like let's say compressed fire was his best skill, like out the gate, and he couldn't do big shots, that wouldn't mean his quirk had necessarily awakened because he was finally able to do bigger ones. It would mean that he had gotten good enough with controlling flame that he was able to disperse it wider and more effectively now. In the same way, I don't think Decay, one, due to the traumatic nature of Shigaraki's background, and two, just because it doesn't make sense for quirks to be that like inherently limited, because that's not something that it would make sense for your body to even necessarily impose. When you look at the way like a lot of evolutionary process works, when you develop these defensive mechanisms, which is what quirks are to a certain degree, they're ways to protect yourself, they're ways to help yourself, to enhance yourself. You don't set them up so that arbitrary conditions need to be achieved to get them, like having all 5 fingers. And you notice Shigaraki's shoes disappeared. The thing about Shigaraki is that we don't know who all Shigaraki is, and because of that, and because of what was said earlier in the series, even where some people misunderstand their own quirks, I don't think it's completely unfair to consider the possibility that Shigaraki, because the other thing you have to realize is that Shigaraki was capable of wearing gloves. If you're wearing gloves, all 5 fingers are touching the same object. All 5 of his fingers were touching the glove. All the fabric's connected. If all the fabric's connected and it goes all the way to his fingertips, then he's got all 5 fingers on the inside of the glove. He's touching the glove with all 5 fingers and not decaying it. To me, that's indicative. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I could totally be wrong, and Horikoshi could really be genuinely going for an awakening type system, and that's fine regardless. I'm just saying that if it turns out that it's not awakening, if it turns out that no, Shigaraki just didn't understand his quirk properly, as was already hinted at as possible earlier in the series, do not be surprised. Okay? It's the best way I can put it. Do not be surprised if it just turns out that no, that like his quirk was decay, and by decay we mean he can just decay stuff. Like that's just how it works. And with more hands breaking, we get flashbacks to his grandpa giving him snacks. We get flashbacks to his grandma being supportive. Everybody tries to make little Tenko smile. And the thing that I think find really fascinating is that as Shigaraki is laying there, he goes, "What I needed them to tell me was," and it's so similar to Izuku that I think it's beautiful. I think it's a great way to highlight once again the dichotomy that Horikoshi is going to set up between the two, because it genuinely feels like Shigaraki wanted to be a hero as a child, and his dad was like, no, we don't do that, no. And it makes sense. His mom was Nana Shimura, the seventh holder of One for All. Almost got me. And died in combat. Died getting basically a city blown up on her face. Like, that's very discouraging for, going forward. And, being like, oh yeah, my kid can be a hero. Like, whatever. Like, yeah, my mom died being a hero, but I'll totally be fine with my kids that I made going down the same path. That's not very common. People do tend to develop aversions towards those similar situations. It's a chain of, like mental anguish and projection leading to trying to control your children, trying to stop them from chasing things that you consider to be dangerous. And to a certain degree, it's fair. But at the same time, he's also 4 or 5. There's no reason to be like, dude, you suck, you can't be a hero, or whatever it was that seemed to be the case. He seemed to be very, 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 very adamantly against it. Of course, Shigaraki could turn out to be like, I wanted to be a firefighter. But, like, the point is that, like, it's possible, it's likely that he wanted to be a hero, it's likely that him and Izuku have the exact same point of origin of deciding they wanted to be heroes and living in an environment, and not a society, an environment. Because the irony here is that the hero society was more cruel to Izuku with his dream than it would have been to Shigaraki with his. For any like robot, or like UA would have loved Shigaraki for that robot exam. Could you imagine him just like even semi-competently being able to just run up and dust all these robots? Like the 3-pointers, the 2-pointers, the 1-pointers, the 0-pointers, it doesn't matter. He would have ran through that mug. But that's not the way his life went, and he probably freaked out and accidentally just like was like trying to push people away, or accidentally touched the ground, and the decay just spread, and the mental anguish really caused him to just like lock up. And the only thing that I could say that might justify the saving of the hands is that child Tenko, because his family would take him by the hand because little Hana would grab his hand so much to try to motivate him, is the real reason why the hands were spared. That was the sign of his peace, and that's what like a small part of his brain, even through all the fear, managed to save, even though he never wanted to hurt them in the first place. That's just how it went down. We get to see Redestro hit 80% liberation. It was a weird flex, but okay. We see the access to range attacks. Looking at it in the Viz art, it looks more like he's trying to tell you that that attack was capable of blowing away multiple city blocks. I'm like looking at the panel right now, and it's just kind of like boom, 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 like rows of houses. But it, because of the way that the power lines are snapping in the shot that I'm looking at, it seems like the attack is traveling diagonally along the panel, like on a diagonal route. So we're going across the panel here. We're facing this way. The attack is going this way, and there's a set of power lines coming this way. These power lines are snapping, which means that the attack, while going through there, is breaking the cord somewhere further down. And that's the indication that it's going through multiple city blocks, because power lines running horizontal through multiple buildings doesn't happen unless there's space, gaps, streets at the very least going through there. And in the process, you know, that's when we get the multiple hands, the grandparent flashbacks. And then Giganto Machia arrives. We finished last chapter with the boom, boom, boom. He is here. He is large. He's looks to be taller than some of the buildings already. It seems like as soon as he got on site, everybody tried to fight him, and Giganto Machia was like, well, they said the more people, like the longer he fought, the bigger he got. It seems like running all the way there, plus fighting a bunch of Meta Liberation Army like fodder, he's full size now, baby. And then we finally, like the last thing we get is a similar shot to the one that we got when Shigaraki took down the tower, and it's him standing there looking kind of dazed, and but now he's covered in blood, all the hands are missing. It's actually a really good shot. Like I'm just like looking at the panel in the drawing, but this time we see like sadness in his eyes, and it seems to me that like we're gonna get next chapter a hard Shigaraki like backstory, like a definitive, like this is who he was, this is where he's going, and this is what he wants to achieve. Because I still don't think he's going to turn away from being a villain. If anything, I think he's going to spec into being like the most misguided like villain band of like vigilantes out here just destroying and ruling the underworld with an iron fist. But I don't think he's going to need to destroy everything anymore. And I think that's like the direction of this character arc now, is to establish him as somebody not only with goals, but with personal attachments and reasons to move further and be a person, not just a force for Deku to overcome. And I think that's like the whole point, is to make sure that the final fight is a clashing of ideals, the clashing of an existences, or two people who had the same starting point, but the symbol of peace took one and the symbol of evil took the other, and raised them both to be the person that they wanted them to be, essentially. Obviously, to a certain degree, the person they both wanted to be, but also the person they both wanted to help their apprentices become, and the places to take over for them. So yeah, like, I I saw rumors online that Japan wasn't happy with this arc, and I do think that has a bit to play with Gigantomachia's arrival. And part of me thinks that Horikoshi made it a point to include that as a potential mechanic, just in case he had to end the arc earlier, in case, you know, things weren't flying as well and people weren't enjoying it. Because at the end of the day, it's the same as like when All Might could show up whenever they needed him to. You need a way to, if the editors at Shonen Jump are coming down at you and they're like, yo, you need to do this, you need to change, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, you know what? At least I wrote something within the narrative that will allow me to get out of this situation already before, you know, my editors even got mad. And if that's the case, I understand. We have not looked at the kids since March, I believe. So there's some people who are big fans of Deku, who are big fans of Bakugo, Shoto, and I love the kids too. I wanted the villain arc, but if it does end here, I fully expect, or in the next 2 or 3 chapters, I fully expect us to get flashbacks. I fully expect us to get another villain-based arc. I've already said that. I think the flashbacks especially, I think, are gonna be key, because they're gonna be a good way to justify some of the whatever happened off screen, because of the fact that he's like, you know, arc jumping essentially for the sake of Shonen Jump. So anyways, I actually like highly rated this chapter, like 9 out of 10. Really, really enjoyed it. It's weird because I feel like we've had 2 or 3 expository chapters in a row, but they haven't felt like they were designed to be exposition completely, and that's really all you can ask for when you get those kinds of chapters, to me. So yeah, I enjoyed this week. I fully plan to be back next week, and I actually, as long as I actually stick to my guns, Monday or Tuesday should have another video for you guys. This one will not be a theory video, but it will be a new thing that I plan on starting on this channel, that I want to dissect certain things, because there are certain literary takes within Shonen that Horikoshi has written commentaries on, but he's done it in such a clever way that I don't see a lot of people talking about it, and I think it's a rather fascinating take. So with that being out of the way, you guys know I have something to look forward to. If you're, you know, a repeat customer and you're constantly coming back to this channel for more, Aniki out.